Hello everybody. I just want to deal with a couple of queries we get regarding the rollers and put people's minds at rest over some issues. The polyurethane rollers come in segments of about a foot long and they're joined together. Occasionally when they're assembled or in use they might wriggle, and you could have high spots where a peak is raised above the adjacent roller segment. That's easy to correct, and preferably we don't want peaks, although in practice they're constantly being pressed down. But to eliminate a peak you just simply have to wriggle the roller and separate the segments. In addition, when you're wriggling the rollers and separating the segments, we've had queries about the gap in between segments. That gap can be 2 millimeters wide without any difficulty. The roller segments are designed with gaps and grooves, and having a groove where the segments join up is not a problem. And the third issue is if you find you don't have enough wriggle room, the rollers are tight on your roller, you can just take a sharp knife and shave off 3 to 5 millimeters off the end of one of the segments and cut it out, and that'll give you more wriggle room to play with all the rollers along the length of the tube. So they're the simple solutions for dealing with rollers that are too tight or have peaks at the joins. And the same is true for the drive roller. The other query we come across is occasionally the rollers are not perfectly flat. They have a PVC tube inside, and the PVC can tend to buckle in manufacturing occasionally. They can be flexed against the bowing if there is any bowing. It is quite alright to flex them against the bowing and try and get as straight as possible. If it's not perfectly straight, it's not a great concern, because any small gaps between the idle roller and the drive roller will be taken up by your felting, and the felt will create a cushion between the two rollers. So you can try and get them as smooth as possible by flexing the bowing out, but they don't have to be absolutely perfect. And the final comment, occasionally you may find that when you put your drive roller in, and it'll happen on the first occasion, it doesn't fully engage in the lock. If it's just a matter of giving it a little nudge to push it down, that's fine. If it's 1 or 2 millimeters too long, just check first of all that your hex drive is in place and fully engaged. And if your hex drive is fully engaged, you can do one of two things. You can slacken the bolts holding the motor housing, which will release the hex drive a little bit more to give you a bit more freedom. Or if it's really necessary, you can file the end of your pin by half a millimeter, a millimeter, whatever is necessary, so that for your particular machine the tolerances line up and it fits inside the housing, the little cup at the end. So there's no problems with, that leads me to my next question. There's no problems with shaving off or filing down the end. Keep it as smooth as possible. Use a rough sander, then followed by a fine sander to keep it nice and smooth. And the third thing I just want to comment on is the actual hex plate itself. I described to you in the earlier video that the ideal scenario is that your hex drive plate can come in and out freely. It means the motor is not under any tension. The drawback of that, of course, is that when you're doing your felting, sometimes you might pull your felting out and pull the drive out with it. Now if you pull the drive out with it, it should be a relatively easy fix to put it back again. But if you find it annoying, what you can do is put a couple of slithers of fine paper inside the square end, or maybe put some sticky tape on the end of the drive plate itself, and just create a firmer fit. Don't put too much paper in or too much interference in, because you'll end up with the hex drive sticking out too far, and we don't want that to happen. We want it to fully engage. But a couple of slithers of small paper just to take up the gap and create some tension, and then when you put the hex drive in, when you get it in, there should be enough tension that it won't want to come out and follow the drive roller. So with those few pointers on the roller, I'm going to move on to the next video, which is the motor housing, the motor controller.